In this room, there is a woman being taunted and tortured by evil spirits. There is a slew of demons in the room, crawling all over her walls, threatening her. One demon in particular has taken on female form and is hovering over this terrified woman as she gets closer and closer, getting ready to devour her. The petrified woman cries out. Through her tears, a light shines across the room. What is it? Who is it? Through all this chaos, is it a savior? Can he save her? While Denise Matthews has had both an amazing and chaotic life, there is one scandal that is biggest of all, and quite frankly, very disturbing to hear. I'd like to issue a warning. I'd advise you to listen all the way to the end of this story because there are some very serious accusations that are both disturbing and frightening, to say the least. It may make you rethink how we view celebrities and why you can never truly believe who they are, and perhaps what they're truly capable of, but only what they want you to see. In 1992, Vanity did an interview with Joan Rivers where she spoke about the night demons haunted her and crawled all over her walls, how a female entity hovered above her to attack her. It was those hauntings and possessions that led her to a life of devotion to Christ. At least that's what we were told. But in her last 2 years of life, it seems old habits may have crept back in and is possibly the reason she is no longer among us. As stunning, charismatic, and loving as Vanity was, it seems no matter how much good she tried to do, bad spirits seemed to always follow her. Bad seeds would constantly be planted inside her to manifest into detrimental chaos. The beginning implantation of those bad seeds started with her turbulent childhood. On January 4th, 1959, Vanity, whose real name was Denise Katrina Matthews, was born to very abusive and damaged parents. As if being biracial at the time wasn't seen as difficult and confusing enough, her African-American father, James, was extremely physically and verbally abusive to her, causing her to have low self-esteem and low self-worth all the way into her adulthood. Her German-Polish mother, Helga, was battling demons of her own. She was an alcoholic and suffered from depression, which oftentimes caused several self-deletion attempts. She was so gone mentally that she couldn't even protect her own children from harm from their father. To make matters worse, Denise was also sexually abused as a child. Some sources believe it was by her father, while other sources claim it was a family friend. Either way, treatment like that made her believe that sex and vulgarity was all she was good for. By the time she hit 15, her father passed away, and she admittedly felt a sense of relief. But her mother's alcoholism and depression continued. To escape her harsh reality, Denise moved away. She entered and won beauty pageants, which gave her the courage to move to New York, where she became a model. But it is also where she was met with some fierce competition. This move came at a cost because, as beautiful as she knew she wasn't considered beautiful enough to go up against the gorgeous tall models who stayed booked and busy. Once again, this took a hit on her self-esteem.
Scandalous life to toxic relationships.
After her stint with modeling didn't work out, Denise moved to California and became an actress. It was her time there where she'd meet the man that would change her life. She met Prince at the 1980 American Music Awards. He was so taken back by her beauty that it's rumored that he stole her from Rick James, who was her date that night, and the two left together. It's said that they became inseparable, that because their traumatic childhoods was so much alike that they were seen as twin flames. Their relationship was very passionate in both art and sex. Prince made Denise, who he started to call Vanity by now, the lead singer of his new girl group. He dressed them up in sexy lingerie and named them the Hookers. Vanity would later on say that she felt cheap because he wanted to name her Vagina. Denise said she never wanted that image but wanted to be a Diana Ross type of singer, being classy and elegant. But because she loved him and wanted to please him, she did it. The two settled on the name Vanity, because he said looking at her was like looking at a female version of himself. But rumor has it that there's a much darker reason she got her name Vanity, and it had absolutely nothing to do with Prince. Keep listening to this story to find out why. Prince renamed his girl group from the Hookers to Vanity 6 and shot them to stardom. They had a huge #1 hit with the classic song Nasty Girl, and the group soared. While the couple was on cloud 9, young, successful, and in love, their relationship started to become volatile. Prince, being a young, successful, and very attractive rock star, was also a notorious womanizer. He had dozens of women all over him all the time, and as beautiful as Vanity knew she was, Prince knew he could get 10 more of her. The constant cheating, as well as Prince not paying her well, was really starting to get to her. She became vengeful and started dating several other men to get back at him. She also began to nurse her sadness with cocaine. The two would argue constantly and violently. There was one argument between them that resulted in Prince kicking Vanity out of the car and left out on the side of the road. Prince actually spoke of the time he threatened to throw her into the swimming pool because she was getting on his nerves. She said, "You can't because you're too little," so he told his bodyguard to do it. But as much as they fought, they made up just as aggressively. Band members and bodyguards was said to have heard Vanity screaming at the top of her lungs because of how hard and rough Prince would, let's say, clap those cheeks. There were times when she'd be seen with bruises on her butt while Prince was seen with bite marks and bloody lips. But sex and art wasn't the only thing that she and Prince were into. Vanity said in an interview that she and Prince both used to dabble with the occult. She and Prince would play with Ouija boards and other forms of witchcraft. She said it was just them being kids and living on the edge, but it seems doing things like that took a toll on her. The bad spirits were really beginning to follow her. Vanity and Prince eventually broke up in 1983 due to a payment dispute over her role in Purple Rain. Prince wanted to pay Vanity only $5,000 to star in the film when she'd requested $1 million. They couldn't come to an agreement, so she left him for good. But her subsequent relationships after Prince were no better. She had romances with many stars like Adam Ant, Billy Idol, and Mickey Free, to name a few. She even had brief flings with her co-stars Ty Mack and John Stamos, who claimed she was very inappropriate with him. In his memoir, John says on the set of their movie Never Too Young to Die that Vanity sexually assaulted him. She'd reached under the table and gave him an unsolicited hand job. This is what John claims happened. He wrote in the book that mere moments after meeting Vanity at a cast dinner for the first time, she's giving me a hand job under the table. Not even sure how it starts. I'm making small talk as she rearranges a napkin in my lap, and the next thing I know, she's all in. It seemed he felt sympathy for her in many ways. He added, "Looking back, I feel for her. Her dad abused her until he died. Then she was modeling at 17 and molded into the sex pot image by influential men who wanted to make her their nasty girl. She ping-ponged from freebasing cocaine to tripping on the stronger drug of evangelical religion. I imagine a lot was done to her, and somehow doing a little something to a younger, inexperienced guy and waving machine guns around between takes gave her a feeling of reclaiming power." It's been alleged that she had a quick fling with James DeBarge, and the both of them shared a nasty drug habit. At one point, the two were caught doing drugs in a dressing room by James's wife, Janet Jackson, in which she chased Vanity off. But if Vanity's relationship with Prince was volatile, then this next relationship was downright explosive. In 1986, Nikki Sixx, a member of rock group Motley Crue, found himself in an admittedly toxic relationship with Vanity. There are two very different ways that Nikki and Vanity saw their relationship. Nikki, in a very disrespectful view of her, saw it as no big deal, and that Vanity was annoying, clingy, and embarrassing. He wrote in his memoir, Heroine Diaries, that he saw Vanity as a disposable human being, like a used needle for the trash, only to be dug up if he was really desperate. He found her pathetic and manipulative, doing things like sending herself flowers and pretending they were from Prince just to make him jealous. Then, after only 3 weeks of knowing him, proposing to him while he was high and telling the media they were getting married. Then going on coke rages and trying to fight him, daring him to hit her. He even bragged in his book, as well as on the Howard Stern show, that one time he knocked Vanity out cold, dragged her by her hair down the stairs, and threw her outside. He said they had absolutely nothing in common except drugs, and that he just wasn't that into her. But Vanity, on the other hand, saw it differently. It's said that Nicky was the one that had been infatuated with her for 4 years until he finally got the courage to pursue her. That he'd agreed to marry her and set a wedding date for December 1987. However, she did agree that they argued all the time, and it seems that the only thing that did truly bring them together was the drugs. They finally broke up after 2 crazy drug-fueled years.
Scandalous Life 3, The Possession of Vanity.
In the late 80s into the early 90s, Vanity was still living wild and recklessly. Though she was doing well career-wise, she was spiraling out of control. She indulged in wild parties and participated in a bizarre world of sex and rock and roll. Most damning of all is that her drug usage was at an all-time high. She'd advanced from coke to full-on freebasing. Her work in Hollywood started to dry up because she'd be high so often, and her body was also starting to shut down. Having so much time on her hands left her with nothing to do except drugs. Around this time, Vanity had also been having dark experiences. She was having visions of evil spirits surrounding her. She believed her home was haunted, with items inexplicably moving or dropping to the floor. She'd hear voices and would be talking to demons, thinking that they were actually the voice of God. She claimed the spirits were even taking over her body and possessing her. One day, an assistant walked into her room to find Vanity levitating off the ground. But with all these creepy experiences, it was that one specific night back in 1992, when the demons crawled on her walls and the female demon attacked her, that she finally realized that she needed to change her life. She'd called out to God to save her that night, and that's when the demons went away. At least that's what she thought. Soon, with the help of a Christian friend, Vanity gave her life to Christ. According to her, she threw away thousands of videotapes of her interviews, music videos, magazines, and clothing. Basically anything that represented her as Vanity, she wanted nothing to do with. She was now going by her real name, Denise Matthews, and would no longer take on roles that sexualized her. She got heavy into her new religion. She began to preach at different congregations, giving her testimony on how she'd been saved from demon possession and the wild life. But the wild life, as well as those deeply rooted bad seeds, wouldn't let her go just yet. Even though Denise was a changed woman of faith, she still wasn't able to change everything. She was still dibbling and dabbling out into the world. She was still participating in shady Hollywood activities, and unfortunately, she was still doing drugs. It wasn't until 1994 that she encountered an experience that changed her life for good. Denise was hospitalized for 3 months because she had overdosed on drugs. In a 3-day coma, she'd gone into kidney failure and was quickly dying. The doctor said she only had 3 days to live, and it was during this time that she claims Jesus visited her. She says he told her that if she completely renounced Hollywood, Vanity, and everything she represents, especially the drugs, then he would save her life. By the time she woke from her coma, Denise Matthews had decided to double down, triple down on her faith and new mission from God. She wanted absolutely nothing to do with Hollywood or the entertainment business at all. She became an evangelical and preached everywhere she could to give her testimony about the evils of Hollywood and witchcraft, something that will surely come back up later. She was so on fire for the Lord that people who were close to her started to turn away. They couldn't deal with her self-righteous, judgmental behavior. A simple conversation with her would turn into a "You're going to hell if you don't get right with God" argument. She was stern and overzealous in her faith. It was like she traded one drug for another, except this drug was religion.
Scandalous Life 4, Marriage to a Serial Killer.
Now deep into her religion, to the point of running many people away, Denise truly believed that God had a special purpose for her life, and one of those special purposes she believed was in football player Anthony Smith. In 1995, Denise was watching TV and Anthony Smith popped up on the screen. She told her friend that God spoke to her and told her to go minister to that young man, that he had some kind of anointing on his life, if she only knew. Denise traveled to go meet him and to inform him that she was sent by God, to let him know that he had a special plan for his life. Then after only 3 days of meeting, Denise proposed to him, and he accepted, with the pair getting married only a month later. Almost immediately, there was trouble in paradise. Anthony became frustrated with Denise's fanatical religious behavior. She was doing things like letting homeless people in and out of their home to take showers, wear his expensive clothes, and she'd give away furniture and luxurious items if she felt like someone else needed them more. She'd even give out their phone number, and different people would call and ask for money. When he'd argue with her about this behavior, she'd brush it off and reiterate that she was on a mission from God. Soon enough, just like the men of her past, Anthony started to become violent with her. He had no problems harming her in front of people either. Once, he'd laid hands on her at a brunch, violently yanking her arm after she said something that he didn't like. Onlookers were afraid for her safety. She needed to get out. Due to the recurring domestic abuse, Denise left him and the couple divorced in 1996 after 1 year of marriage. That was probably for the best, because if she hadn't left, it's possible that Denise could have been Anthony's first murder victim. Anthony had a troubled childhood of his own. His mother was a wild alcoholic, his father left, his stepfather was abusive to his mother, and his big brother was abusive to him. On top of that, he was a very big and awkward child, so he was bullied often. In high school, his coaches encouraged him to go to college and play football professionally. During his time in college, the students noticed that he was a very strange guy, that he'd make dark jokes about violence and laugh about it while staring awkwardly. After his divorce from Vanity, a slew of bad luck came Anthony's way. He was arrested for a domestic violence charge from the woman he'd been cheating with. In 1997, he was released from the Raiders and went to play for the Broncos, where he suddenly, and for no reason at all, quit. He'd also remarried and had a baby on the way, but no income coming in, so he started to commit crimes. Anthony started to dress up like law enforcement, sporting FBI badges, handcuffs, and guns. No one knew why he was doing this, but by now Anthony had changed, and for the worst. He'd lost his mind. In November 1999, two brothers and owners of an auto shop, Ricky and Kevin Nettles, were kidnapped by Anthony, who was pretending to be a cop. It's unknown why he targeted them, but by November 11th, the brothers' bodies were found. They'd been shot multiple times, with Ricky being found mutilated and clearly tortured to death. The case went cold because no one ever suspected Anthony Smith to be the murderer. Then in 2003, a furniture store by the name of Simply Sofa was firebombed. The police could tell that it was arson and wanted an explanation from the owner. She explained that she'd been harassed by Anthony, that he'd come to her confinement shop and accused her of breaking his item. He became threatening towards her and demanded she pay him $650 to pay for the damages. Even though she knew his broken items wasn't her fault, she complied just to get him away from her. Unfortunately, he returned a few days later, stating that he'd lost the check and demanded she'd write him another. Seeing how he was even more aggressive and threatening than before, she wrote him another check, but this time that wasn't good enough. After cops did their investigation of the burned-down business, they saw that Anthony was to blame. The case of the firebombing went to trial, but the jury deadlocked twice, and Anthony was released. This was a huge mistake. In March 2011, Anthony and 2 other men were charged with the murder of Murillo Ponce. The 3 men tortured and killed Ponce over a business deal gone wrong. While Anthony was on trial for this case, he was charged with the murder of 3 people, the Nettle brothers and another man named Dennis Henderson. Though the jury was never able to prove he killed Ponce, on January 22, 2016, Anthony was sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole for the 3 lives they knew for sure that he took. Fortunately, Denise had escaped this demon in time. But what I am about to share with you shows she could never really escape all the bad entities that followed her in life.
Scandalous Life 5, Backsliding and Betrayals.
Okay, again, this is where I must issue a warning. What you're about to hear may be upsetting and disturbing, but also take this information with a grain of salt. Know that this news is alleged and can be hearsay, but it's still unsettling to say the least. The person from where this story comes from seems to know people who were in Denise's inner circle, and it's those sources that have relayed these messages to her. There is a woman by the name of Shalimar who's made several videos discussing the last 2 years of Denise Matthews' life. Here's what she claims happened to Vanity. In 2014, Denise Matthews was living in Fremont, California. It was there where she remained relatively out of the spotlight and lived comfortably amongst good community and friends. She attended Pure Hearts Ministries, where she was a fiery evangelist, frequently preaching to the congregation. But in the summer of 2014, a strange group of, let's say, Jewish men paid her a visit. These men came to her house and asked her about her church activities. They asked how strong she was in her faith, how devoted she was to the Lord. Then suddenly they went from asking about her devotion and faith to Christ to blatantly accusing her of backsliding and breaking her vows to Jesus. They said because she wasn't really living righteously like she claimed, that they had the right to seize her right there and that they could take her life at any moment. Then they hit her with a proposition. They told her that if she joined their circle and helped them to murder a young man, then she could live. They told her about this young man who was 32 years old at the time, 23 years apart from Denise. Keep in mind the number 23 is very significant to this story. They told her that he was a prophet who was stopping them from doing some things that they wanted to do. They needed to remove him, and they wanted her help. Now you may be wondering who these men are. Why did they want Denise's help in this, and what did this have to do with her? Well, this group of men had powerful ties in Hollywood and were a part of, and even caused, a lot of well-known mysterious celebrity deaths. They operated like the mafia, but with the occult. For rituals, they used celebrities, especially those easy to blackmail, and Denise was an easy target. Keep listening, and you'll see why. After they gave her this proposition, they also let her know that if she did help them with this sacrifice, not only would she live, but she'd be blessed by God with metaphysical abilities, that she'd be able to perform miracles like they did in the Bible. She'd be able to heal herself and others like Jesus did. She'd be a magical blessing. It's been said that Denise was a very kind yet very gullible woman, and knowing how overzealous and fanatical she could be, she believed them. Besides, she was no stranger to occultic practices herself. In her early 20s, she delved quite a bit into witchcraft. Her favorite was divination. Apparently, the real reason she got her name, Vanity, had absolutely nothing to do with Prince. You see, one of her rituals was to go inside her closet, where there was a vanity set. She'd sit inside, light a candle, and begin to whisper incantations. She'd wait for images of the future, or even spirits to communicate with. She'd done this so much that was the real reason her name was Vanity. After Denise agreed to join these men in their quest to sacrifice this young man, they soon began to frequent her home to do group rituals. Keep in mind that while she's doing these rituals with this group of men, she's still attending church, which is what the group advised her to do. They told her to be as holy as possible, to look very righteous in the eyes of others, so she continued to evangelize and guest speak at different churches. She'd brag about how she was no longer sinning like the rest of those who were sitting in the pulpits. While she was allegedly living this double life, misfortune started to come Denise's way. She lost her Social Security benefits. Apparently, she'd been taking some work in Hollywood and wasn't reporting her earnings to the Social Security office. And if things couldn't get any worse, the IRS was also after her. She wasn't paying her taxes. So having the IRS in pursuit and her supplemental income seized, Denise became homeless. She began to stay with different friends and family. Now, while she was staying with different people, the group was still coming around. They'd visit her wherever she was, no matter who she was staying with. But because they couldn't do the rituals at the different people's homes, the group took Denise to different lodges where people couldn't get suspicious of their activities. But friends and family did become suspicious, and word started to spread around Fremont about Denise and her weird dealings with these men. It became a known secret amongst the people of Fremont about how Denise was backsliding and back to dabbling in witchcraft. What they didn't realize is that it was worse than just dabbling, but that she was in a full-on occultic cult with sinister plans. To help get her life back on track, Denise was instructed to create a GoFundMe account so that she could take care of her medical bills as well as rectify her situation with the IRS and Social Security office. It's on her GoFundMe page where Denise shows that the number 23 is special to her. She speaks on having a relationship with Christ and being saved for 23 years and how she's had 23 surgeries, but the number 23 was also special to the group for very different reasons. By the end of 2014 into 2015, the different people that allowed Denise to live with them began to pass away. People weren't sure if any of this had to do with her ritualistic practices or just sad coincidences, but the optics were still bad. In mid-2015, during one of their meetings, Denise was informed by the group that she was going through spiritual warfare, that she was being spiritually attacked by a deceased relative of the young man, the prophet. They believed this was the reason she was going through so much turmoil, that this dead relative was upset with her for trying to kill him. They began to do protection rituals to keep her safe from the spirits attacking her, but they also continued the sacrifice rituals. But nothing was working against the young man, nor was anything improving in her life. The people of Fremont really started to notice that her life was falling apart fast and seemed to be getting worse. They believed it was because she was still dealing in the occult. They knew about these rituals and even why she was doing them. Some even knew something about the attempts to sacrifice the prophet. They had no proof, though. They just knew she needed help. But how much time did they have? Hell, how much time did she have? 2015 was coming close to an end, and the group informed Denise that she was now on a deadline. The prophet, the young man they desperately wanted gone, needed to be dead by 2016. Since none of the rituals were working, they started working on a spell to destabilize him, hopefully making it easier to delete him. They also told her to start selling her belongings. She was told after she sells them that they'd take her to a private location where she'll find herself, to find who she really is. She thought this place was a spiritual retreat where folks congregate for spiritual healing and self-development. They never clarified. But yet, for some reason, they needed to do this soon. She began selling her stuff as much as she could, as fast as she could. There are many posts on her Instagram page that shows her trying to get rid of many items from her Vanity days, which is ironic since she said she'd thrown everything away, everything that represented her as Vanity. She even re-released her book, Blame It on Vanity. There's a video on YouTube that shows her thoughtlessly getting rid of some of her items to a nephew or family friend. Before, when she said she was no longer taking royalties for singing in Vanity 6 or her solo albums, she was now admitting that she was taking royalties for them. She was selling as much as she could, almost desperately. Problem is, it was now 2016. Time was up. It was January 23rd, and the group of men told Denise to write her will. And all the stuff that she couldn't sell, leave it in the will for loved ones and the church. She didn't want to do this, but they forced her. The group did, however, give her another agenda. They let her know that there was another celebrity that they were after, and if they could get rid of him, then they would no longer go after the prophet, and she would be okay. Her services with them would no longer be needed. In between that time, it was said that Denise's life started to look a little better. She'd gotten a place of her own and things were looking up. But on February 8th, 2016, when, oddly enough, rapper DMX survived his reported overdose, the plan with Denise and the prophet was reestablished. They told her to tell the congregation that she was no longer a part of the church body, that she was no longer a Christian, and they started to make preparations for her to go to the private location. That Saturday at church, she got up to speak, and after preaching a few words, she then said to the congregation, "I think I'm ready to go home." Then 23 days after signing her will on January 23rd, after celebrating her 23 years in Christ and mourning her 23 surgeries, after being approached by this strange group of men, linking her to a man who was 23 years her junior, Denise Katrina Matthews passed away on February 15th, 2016. Time and time again, Hollywood has shown its dark side. Wild sex and drug usage is rampant. But have you ever heard of Hollywood cursing people? There's a little girl who dominated the industry, but it said she's a curse, causing harm to everyone she meets. To find out who that is, watch this video right here, When I Create It.